Welcome to the Wine Nirvana podcast. Wine reviews for the average wine drinker. No pretense, no snobbery, no numerical ratings. And here's our host, Stephen Hawk.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, it is Stephen Hawk, your wine guru. Hey, thanks everyone for joining me on the podcast today. My guest is Akhil Reddy. He is the second generation owner of a pioneering winery in West Texas called Reddy Vineyards. So Akhil, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. It's great to be on.
Although you were born and raised in Texas, you are of Indian American descent, as opposed to American Indian descent.
Exactly.
Because your parents immigrated to the United States. And tell me about that journey.
Yeah, so my parents moved to the United States in the 70s. They're from South India, close to a major city called Hyderabad. They actually grew up in smaller towns away from the major city. So my father, his grandfather, and we have a lineage of farming in our blood. And I believe my father is the fifth generation, which makes me the sixth generation in farming. And they were allowed to come to the U.S. And immigrate here because my father got into Kansas State University for his master's in agriculture, and then he went to Colorado State for his PhD in soil and plant sciences.
And then what took him, really, both your parents, to Texas?
So once he graduated in Colorado, he wanted to farm. So he moved to Seminole, Texas, which is a smaller town, and he started farming cotton and other types of produce. And then he bought land in West Texas, closer to Lubbock in Brownfield, Texas. So thereafter, he started growing cotton peanuts mainly. He did milo and other produce, and he formed a soil and plant consulting laboratory in Lubbock. And my parents ran that laboratory for, I believe, 20 years. And soil petiole samples from all over the country would come in there, and they would do the testing. I remember as a kid, we'd have these bags of dirt and these bags of plants where you had to go put the leaves in essentially like a oven and heat them up, and then they would tell us to do, move this to this, and we had no clue what we were doing. And my father had all these test tubes and all this big laboratory equipment, and me and my twin sister loved it because we just play around with it, and he didn't mind. And now that I think about it, it was a very serious laboratory that they ran. So they did that for 20 years, and eventually they got into grape growing, which we'll get into later.
For you kids, it was just a big chemistry set, huh?
It was.
Yeah. I spent 10 years in Texas a number of years ago, lived there, and the last thing in the world I would have thought about doing was growing grapes there. And so your father, VJ, I believe, was one of the first to do so. What compelled him? Because that was a pretty bold move on his part.
It was a really bold move. So you're absolutely right. Most people do not think of vineyards or wine in Texas in the same sentence, and rightfully so. Most of Texas is not suitable for premium wine grapes. When we look at the terrain or the terroir of West Texas, where we are in the Texas High Plains, we're at 3,300 feet plus elevation, flat. We have dry heat and low moisture, low disease pressure. We have very cool nights. And so it's very similar to parts of France and Spain and Italy, the great growing regions of the world. So people don't know that. And that's what we're trying to do, is educate people on that. So one, he knew that farmland was very productive in that area. And there's certain types of crops that you can grow really well. His close friend Neil Newsom, who's one of his best friends to this day, is another big grape grower in Texas. He convinced him to, hey, VJ, plant a couple acres. You'll like it. It's more like it's a fun thing to do. He planted a couple acres of Cabernet. It did really well, won some awards, and then he said, "Hey, I'm gonna go for it." At that time, Texas had very few acres planted, and it was not a big industry at that point. And so my dad, being himself, he's a very bold kind of visionary and takes a lot of risk. He started planting 20 acres, 30 acres. At one point, he planted 60 acres, which is really tough to manage and understand how to do that. And they all thought he was crazy. All his friends and everybody in the area said, "Hey, you're gonna fail. No, who's gonna buy those grapes? And how can you plant this many varieties?" And there was lots of questioning. So that's my dad in a nutshell. He's kind of a bold guy and a visionary, and he has fun with it. So Neil was really the person that inspired him to do it, and then he fell in love with it. And so thereafter, after the years came, he just focused on wine grapes only, and he leased his other land to other farmers, so he wouldn't have to take the time to farm other crops. So he's really been just a grape grower specialist for the last, 18, 20 years. And this year is our 25th anniversary of our vineyard.
When were his first plantings?
1997.
Oh, okay. So, yes, making it now the 25th.
Yes, it's a special year for us. Yeah, and my parents, along with some other winemakers and growers around Texas, the Hack family, the Newsoms, and a few other friends, they traveled the world. They had a blast. They'd go to Chile, Argentina, they'd go to Spain, Italy. Usually once a year with this group, they would travel the world and taste the wines and see what's going on. And so I think that inspired my dad to plant the varietals that he planted. To date, we have 38 varietals on our vineyard, which is very rare.
Indeed, it is, and it's apparently it's up to 400 acres as well.
It is.
So, what do you do with all those grapes?
So we're primarily a grower, and for the past 25 years, we've been growing the grapes and then selling them to wineries all over Texas. Most of the fruit goes to the Hill Country in the Austin Fredericksburg corridor, and some of those wineries have been our clients for 25 years. The Dr. Becker in the Hill Country is one of our first clients, my parents' first clients, and still is to this date. So it's a beautiful thing to see that. And then the grapes that we make at our estate winery, we kind of get to pick and choose. It's actually like the winemaker's playground, and we can make beautiful blends and mix things the way we want to. And depending on the vintage, we can choose and manage our vineyard the way we want to for a particular style.
Right, and you certainly have plenty to choose from.
We do. So
in terms of raw materials,
we do.
yeah.
It becomes, on the vineyard side, the management side, it becomes extremely complicated. Each varietal has their own characteristics, their own budding, ripening, and throughout the season, they're complicated in their own ways. So the difficult part is you can't just expect them to be managed the same way. You're constantly having to check different blocks and keep data on these different varietals. And once, after 10, 20 years, you get an understanding, kind of a normalization of how to do it, but we still don't know. Every year is so different. Texas, as you know, the weather is very erratic. But I think that also plays into the unique characteristics of the wine that is coming out of Texas.
Sure, yeah, because of the unique climate. So, are all the grapes Vitis vinifera, or do you have some ringers in there?
I think all of them are Vitis vinifera. Yes, correct.
You have favorable temperatures, although, as you well know, all farming is a crapshoot. But in the arid plains of West Texas, how do you manage your water resources?
So water is we use drip irrigation for watering, which is a very conservative way to water vines. As you know, grapevines really thrive on stress. And there's a
Sure.
very fine balance of giving the plant too much water or too little water. If we have heat spikes in Texas, as you know, it can get normal heat in the peak summer, it gets into the hundreds, low hundreds. But once in a while, you can get 112, and that's not good. So you have to, understand how to water plant and canopy management. But in terms of water, grapevines are very conservative. They're in terms of water uptake and intake. In Texas, we pump from wells, so underneath the ground, right? And that comes from the Ogallala Aquifer, which I believe is one of the world's largest aquifer systems underground.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think I've heard that. Yeah.
Comes all the way from Nebraska and it trickles down into the high plains of Texas. And so that's where we get our water from. And we try to stay ahead of the curve a bit. So, one project we started last year was building a man-made reservoir. So we're actually, digging a little bit into a low spot where water typically runs off to, and we're creating essentially a very, very large pond. So if we do get excessive rain or a lot of snow that year, that water will stay in that little pond and we can reuse that to irrigate with.
Now, obviously, as a second generation winery owner, you had plenty of advantages. What's one thing you wish you had known at the beginning that you now know?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm a second generation vineyard owner, and in the winery side, I'm actually the first. So I
Oh,
I
okay.
founded the winery side after taking multiple courses, and one being the UC Davis Wine Executive course. And there's a lot I didn't know about the wine side. The vineyard side, my dad has a plethora of knowledge, and different vineyard owners or managers will tell you so many different things. So, I always say take a balance of it and understand that you're in for a wild ride. Uh, Follow best practices, but then be open to change. And the winery side, what I wish I would have known, that's a good question. I'm constantly seeking advice. So if I had to say, give anybody advice, it's take on mentors from different experience levels and backgrounds. I think I would do even more of that if I could. So, from winemakers to winery business owners, I think there's a lot of knowledge that could be shared, and just not making those mistakes that that I made in the beginning would be nice. And we all make mistakes.
Inevitably, we all do. But yeah, getting a broad spectrum on other people's knowledge definitely has to be a helpful thing.
Definitely, yeah.
So your current winemaker is Lude Coates. So tell me about him and your working relationship.
So Lude is originally from South Africa. He's a viticulturist and enologist, so both expertise in both sides, the vineyard and being a winemaker. Lude had a experience in South Africa and then in California in Paso Robles, and also in Sonoma, Napa, and even Kentucky. So he had a very broad set of knowledge. Through our network, we were able to meet him and interview him, and he, was just one of those things that was a natural collaboration where in talking to him, we agreed on, letting the vineyard express itself, what kind of wines we were trying to make, putting Texas on the map even further. And Lude, he's a family guy. He has three kids and his wife. They moved all the way to Texas. And if you ever meet him, he's just a very gentle, well-spoken guy, extremely knowledgeable, and a little bit reserved. which is interesting. But when you talk about winemaking or certain methods, you'll see him just get very bold, and he's so passionate about it. And he's more of a traditionalist, I would say. But he's also very hands-on and innovative, which is what I needed as a partner in Texas. Being in Texas, our wine industry, we're, I believe, fifth, going on to close to getting fourth largest in the country.
Wow.
But and also being so far in West Texas, it's not easy to recruit a lot of winemakers. It's not a big industry in that area. Through kind of the networking and people that were very helpful, that we were blessed to find him, and he's loving West Texas as well.
Speaking of innovation, your father planted a unique circular vineyard. What was that all about? And it's an ongoing experiment.
It is. My dad always likes to throw surprises at us. One time it was building, second floor, a barn and an apartment on top of the barn in the middle of our vineyard. And he said, "Hey, like come visit." This is when I think I was in California for college. And we came and we were like, "What is this? This is beautiful!" Like he built it. There's all windows, 360 view of our vineyard. So that's one surprise. Another surprise was he was like, "I'm gonna plant a circular vineyard." So he didn't tell any of us. And I think his inspiration was he wanted a podium and a sitting area as a circle, and then all the vines directed towards that circle. And he created, if you look at the aerial view, it looks like a circle and then an inner circle where there's a podium there. And that podium, I actually got married. We had our wedding there. We think that this circular planting is possibly one in the world. We're not sure if there's another one. I'd love to see it. The most interesting part, I think, is that he decided to plant multiple different varietals in those rows. And so you get you get a natural blend of all these wines that the grapes come from, and then the sun hits it in a circular motion, right, as it progresses along. So ripening's a little bit different, and every year that block has given us beautiful fruit that we co-ferment and make wine. So it's extremely special, and every year that fruit is so different, and that wine is so different, and that's what I love about it.
In addition to the podcast here, there will be a companion blog post where there is a photograph of the circular vineyard, and I wondered what that little platform was all about. And I also review your field blend that comes from that vineyard. So I taste and talk about that. So what are the varietals that go into that?
So in the field blend in that block is Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Petit Syrah, Tannat, Sangiovese, Barbera, and Cinsault.
And apparently, you never know exactly how much there is of each because everything is, as a field blend, everything is harvested and fermented together.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We harvest it all, take it to the winery, which sits on our vineyard, and we ferment it all together. Some years you'll see a lot more ripeness. Some years we'll harvest a little early. It really depends on the weather and the Brix and pH levels that we decide to pick that fruit at.
As you well know, many winemakers these days strive for a consistent style, which makes it easier to market the wine. But this field blend then really changes with every vintage.
It really does. It really does change with the vintage and the harvest, right? Because sometimes we'll have a later harvest. Typically, our heavy reds, we call them, are harvested at the end of September. Usually by September 23rd, we're done. But sometimes they'll go into October 15th. And then you're seeing just totally different characteristics and probably a little more ripeness. And then sometimes we harvest early because the maturity is there and the right acidity is there, and it gives you a little bit more of a fresh, brighter wine. And that's typically what we go for on most of our wines that we make. But we let the vineyard dictate our wines more than the winery dictating the style of wine. So we're really going for expression of the vineyard and good chemistry levels and maturity in that fruit.
Have you begun to see any impact of climate change on your harvest?
We have. I mean, we've seen some warming. Erratic weather in Texas is kind of synonymous. It's always quite erratic.
It's been like that for a long
It
time.
has. It's hard for us to tell. It is a little bit harder, but I think we have seen higher temperatures and a little bit more erratic weather. The weather that can be very devastating for us is hailstorms in the early spring. So when those primary buds come out, if we get a hailstorm, that can diminish. That can take off 50% of your fruit for that year. And then early frosts are another thing that typically happens every year. But if that hits at the right time, it can also, kill off your primary buds and sometimes your secondary if it comes as a late frost. And we do certain things like we burn hay bales and we have the wind kind of heat up certain areas, and it helps for a little bit. But if you're reaching temperatures below 29, 28 and lower for more than 10, 20, 30 minutes an hour, you're there's not going to be much luck there.
No, and on the plains, the winds can be relentless. There's no doubt about that. So things can change really fast.
That's true. Yes.
So, what is your biggest challenge now? Would you say, like, what keeps you up at night?
Weather could keep you up at night, but you have to, in farming, you just have to accept it. And that's probably the hardest part about being a business owner of a winery that also operates their vineyard, is that you just never know what kind of fruit is going to come in when, and what is the volume, because then you can't even calculate your cash flow. So that I would say that kind of keeps me up at night, but we do our best to just accept it and go with the flow. I would say the hardest part about owning a winery is sales. It's always going to be sales. So we're a small family-owned business. I have one employee who's our COO, and he's a sommelier. His name's Eric Sigmund, and he runs our sales side. And he's driving all over the place. And initially, when we first started, we were both delivering cases to restaurants ourselves. And being based out of the Dallas area, sometimes Eric would have to take 10 or 15 cases, drive it to Houston, come back, and do more work.
Those are long drives.
They are, and that's how we got started. Then we signed on with Southern Glaciers for distribution in Texas, and that really helps with logistics. But we still have to do a lot of work with them and collaborate with them in terms of meeting with chefs, meeting with restaurant owners, meeting with retail, and then we've hired brand ambassadors in the larger cities and Lubbock to do tastings of our wine at different stores, because otherwise it's very hard to reach people. They just don't know, like they just don't know we're there. So I always say definitely the most difficult and challenging part is sales, probably because we focused first on our wine. Our priority is always the quality of our wine first, and that's why, even to this day, we don't have a tasting room, a full-time wine bar or tasting room yet. We have plans for it, but we've been so busy in the vineyard and so busy making wine and getting our name out there through sales that we haven't gotten to that. I think that's the next step for us.
There's always an upside, also. So, what's the favorite part of what you do?
The favorite part of what I do is definitely enjoying the wine. I mean, we make wines that we like to drink. The funnest thing to do is to take a bottle of your own wine to a party or enjoy it with friends and family. And then when you win awards and you can see a little bit of the results from that, it's fantastic. But for me, I love the artistry behind it, even from designing our label and our branding from when we first started to designing the types of wines that we wanted to make. I think that's where my passion really lies. And I'm more of a macro type of person versus micro. And that's why Lude and Eric, we work so well together because we all have different skill sets. From the branding side and what wine is, wine is meant to be shared, and it's something that's just really fun and can be passed down to generations. And there's always a story behind that vintage. So, and that goes into how I wanted to create our brand for and represent our family. If you look at our bottles, the signature line, you'll see that cut on the top. So it's a triangular peak. So when you look at that, hold that bottle a little further away, that's actually the silhouette of our barn where our winery sits in. And in West Texas is flat for days. So it's a straight cut die angles. And even from the paper, I wanted to create a feel of West Texas. So you can feel kind of the soil and the dirt and the flat softness of that paper, and the authenticity of being clean and clear in West Texas. We even put, block designation. Where did you find that fruit? So for the field blend, we put the circle. So you can, when you go there, Stephen, you can go and walk to the circle and see the grapes on those vines. And other bottles will say the block numbers. So it's typically 2 to 3 blocks that we pick from sometimes because we do a lot of blends. And so, authenticity is really important for us. And I think I I'm really proud of what we've done. And I think, we're going to put Texas on a higher level on the map of wine.
Yeah, which would be great. Because, like you say, it's not the first thing people think about at all. And I'll tell you, it really, it really is flat. I had occasion to do some driving in the Panhandle a few years ago, and I was on a road. It was dead straight and dead flat, as you can imagine. And a little dot appeared on the horizon, and I'm going 70 miles an hour, right? Well, it was a silo, and it seemed like it took 10 minutes for this thing to come up, right? And then it blows past.
Yep.
And then for another 10 minutes, it got smaller and smaller and smaller in the rear view mirror. And that road, the elevation didn't change and it did not turn. So that's how flat it can be up there.
That is exactly West Texas. There's an old saying, you'll never lose your dog in West Texas. You can see him from miles away. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, people really don't think of Texas and wine together unless they've already tasted or been immersed in it. But you know the story of TV Munson. He saved French wine in the 1800s. They were they had a devastating parasite called Phylloxera attacking all their vines, and they were very close to losing all of their wine production. And TV Munson, a scientist from North Dallas area, was able to give them some recommendations and pick some vines that they could graft and literally save their industry. So I don't think people know that there's a lot of history of wine in Texas. And then another thing is, I believe Texas is the number one wine consuming state in the country, which is interesting. Is there's a lot of people that like to have a lot of fun and drink good wine and eat good food, and so we're here to have them have some local wine.
That's interesting. I certainly knew the story about the phylloxera scourge and the idea of grafting American vines onto European rootstock, but I did not know it was a Texan that came up with that concept.
Yeah, he's very famous in the wine world.
There's an old saw that to make $1 million in the wine industry, you have to start by spending $1 million. So what would you do if, say, you had a few extra $100,000 to spend?
That's a great question. I think we'd use that money for a tasting room. I think that's our next step, and I think it takes a lot. People don't realize it takes a lot to one, build out a wine bar, tasting room, or restaurant, and then two, it's even harder to staff these days. So, for us, being a small family and business, we're very hands-on. People have to fit, our culture and respect and work well together and work hard. Unfortunately, it's been a little harder to find employees these days, and which I think hopefully will change, after we get over the pandemic and kind of the losses we've taken there. But yeah, I think I'd use that money to help with sales and reaching people to come hang out with us, taste the wines, and have an experience.
And people do always enjoy visiting the winery and talking about the wines and how they're made. And this is part of what I enjoy about wine. There's a story in every bottle, and often a fascinating one.
Absolutely. I mean, from how the vineyard got started to what happened that year, what kind of crazy weather there was, to how, why'd you make the wine like this? There's so many variables and so many routes you can take. We love it. So we participate in tons of festivals and restaurant tastings and lots of events like that. And it's really, until someone hears that story and tastes the wine, it tastes a little bit different. You get depth, you get history into it, and the experience is just furthered so much. We also love to do blind tastings. So people, is this a French wine or is this an Italian wine? And which is great because the French have how many they've been doing wine for on record for 1,000 years, and here in Texas, really just 25, 30 years of fast growth. And in the last 10 years, Texas has grown exponentially, which is amazing. So we're babies compared to many of the European countries, and we respect that. We love their passion and what they've done, and we take that knowledge and then we apply it to our terroir, and this is what we're coming up with.
You're exactly right about blind tastings because they strip away snobbery and preconceptions and can be great for opening people's minds and palates to new experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much fun. I always tell people, even family parties or friend parties, just do blind tastings. It's so much fun. You can learn about wine a lot more, and people enjoy the education aspect of it too.
What is the one common myth about a life in wine that you would want to debunk?
I think, I mean, 100% is that it is it's a fun, luxurious way to live. That is definitely not it. It's not glamorous. It is not glamorous at all. It is one of the most difficult industries to be in. From the vineyard side being in farming is extremely difficult. Like I said before, there's so many variables. You're dealing with weather, you're dealing with capital intensive business, lots of labor. But, I think the reason why there's thousands and 100,000 wineries and vineyards in this world is that it's such a beautiful place to be. When you're planting that vine to seeing it grow after 3 years to 15 years down the line, these are essentially your family members, and you take care of them. You see what happens every year, and I think that variability is what's so striking or so captivating for the human individual, is that it's such a challenging, solution oriented, problem solving industry, and that's where I think it's most enticing. The winery side is also extremely difficult because you one have to intake really great fruit to make great wine. Two, you have to decide on your protocol, and you have to pre-purchase everything, and you have to have your strategy, and then everything's going to go wrong, and then you have to figure out how to keep on track. And then the next step is sales. I mean, I always say that's the hardest part about this business is sales. So extremely competitive, right? It's You have thousands of wineries competing for that one shelf space or that area of selling wine. So it's definitely not glamorous, but it has an outwardly aura to it. I guess that would be the way to put it. It's you're taking this grape from the vineyard and you're doing all sorts of things, and you're letting nature take care of the rest. Kind of the man, we can put that wine in the bottle and then you cork it, and the rest is up to the earth and life of that microbiome in that bottle, which is super cool because you never know what you're going to get and you're never going to know how it's going to age, and each life cycle is different of that wine.
Indeed. Well, as I mentioned, there will be a blog post about Reddy Vineyards on winervana.com. And why don't you also give us your website where people could go and order some wine?
Yeah, that would be great. Please go and order lots of wine or join our wine club at readyvineyards.com. That's RE, D as in dog, D as in dog, Y, vineyards with an S.com. You can find out a lot of information about our different wines. You can purchase there. It's almost all the time free shipping. And then we have a very interesting wine club as well. And then you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Ready Vineyards.
Well, Akhil, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
And listeners, I will leave you with this from Benjamin Franklin. In wine there is wisdom, in beer there is freedom, in water there is bacteria.
This has been Wine Nirvana. To learn more, visit us at www.winervana.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.